Journey to the dark side of the moon. The mighty Hebrew. CONTRADICTIONS. Box with jaw, use your own reach, eating by beats, king up the street heartbeat, sees this journey darkness, the moon falls, mind trapped like Saul, vanguard of Elohim, this sin that's where Marla beans die like the enemy, cryptic knowledge, get lost in translation, sensation, awake the pioneer that was eaten by your Gentile apes, priest by me. Execute the youth's fate, Hunsu Quan, star on track like the Raffican. Insane as the membrane on hill, smoking cypress, vision from the iris of M-I-N-D. See titans falling as prophecy bomb. Compton, Philly up the Harlem. Israel, I heard the calling of our forefathers in Tanakh. From Stinson, I'm Sion, speaking sins all. Sins of our Hebrew ancestors ours. Since the fall from the all. 2/3 robotic like nemesis. 2/3 your lives is moving swift. 2/3 dying for wickedness. 2/3 rise and repent quick. 2/3 robotic like nemesis. 2/3 your lives is moving swift. 2/3 dying for wickedness. 2/3 rise and repent quick. Pioneer fight, priest fight, make Quan die, uphold the way. Allah Hayam vacate child's play. My mind straight, satanic hatred. We live now for the ancients. Resurrect, trick of assassination. My appel be sacred. Spiked up, wearing the turban in the urban. Teaching on street corners with warriors. Reading Torah. Cause the laws filling bites and serpents. My people hurting from the curses. Deuteronomy 28, 68 codes. It's verses and scrolls. Blackness eat them, lurking for control. Israelites. Solomon curtains, we buy words, beat the chosen. Devil speak when you spoken. Prince Balthazar young, Yasha Allah, crushing you nations, idle powers into powder. Bodies under dead flowers, the way of a samurai. Never live as cowards, we uphold honor. We God Abanawa, our sovereign power, our sire over Arasazar. Lion king of Zion, conquer the liar. Spit to knock fire, to burn Esau into stumble. Truth they fumble, World War III, Royal Rumble. Soundless to crafty mumble, to us they body heads humble. God, I got the beast running. Back to the dungeons of London to watch jackals feast on their carcass, living dormant and cliffs up the rocks, mountain climb. They fell from yard ass savages, dirty, nasty, river rat bastards. They misplay Queen's dragon, fucking faggots. I expose Vatican's Pope Benedict sucking dick. This is the real shit that tells you what's here. If you don't want to hear it, close your ears. Mojito is near, beware. Soon your faces will melt from your tendons by a nuclear nemesis. Born in new spirits, I do me us. Rulership is finished. Guy quabs just beginning. The surface breaking through iron meat and fifth deadly venom. Toe shadow, you sinners. War is our vengeance to stop the sickness and rise to healing. If y'all eat bread, children. 2/3 robotic like nemesis. 2/3 robotic like nemesis. 2/3 your lives with 2/3 dying for wickedness. 2/3 rise and repent quick. 2/3 robotic like nemesis. 2/3 your lives is moving swift. 2/3 dying for wickedness. 2/3 rise and repent quick. Shalom Bahashim Yahweh Hakovish Yisrael Wa Shema Yisrael Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Red. Journey to the dark side of the moon. 2022, the mighty Hebrew, live and direct, Tanzania, East Africa, all the way from Philly, Honey Park in the building. We be the Elohim. We got 311 trillion, 40 billion year history, from the dimension of Beru, incarnated 5.5 million BCE. By the way of the Ramahos, post-Diluvian, as the children of Israel, also known as the Hebrew Israelite sovereign nation. See now. The mighty Hebrew, universal thoughts in the building. Chief Kantar, TG Lewis, Lord Ortega, Jeremiah Judah, Queen Karima, Lion's Den, one life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying. One life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying. Carry streets burning flames, you die young with no name. Parents put away in cages, being watched by dogs and evil mice, holding gauges for children's rages. Drugs got the brain fried like raisins, leaving hoary hairs with the blame. Ashamed that the revolution was in vain. Integrationists raise Cain. DHS take away our babies. Cops shoot Judah in the back, leaving blood stains. Deuteronomy 28. In the land that is strange, they took our turban ornaments, rights away. And Canaan were kings or vagabonds, get bombed for throwing lots at Yasha Allah. Now Palestine threw rocks at imposters that claim Abba Nawa as their father. Falsifying icons during the Renaissance, while the 12 tribes got sold, still in the blood and the Vinci Code. Just as if the world's cold, Yah only knows if I rule the world like Curtis Blow. With the doves cry as we grow, little ones lose focus, holding choppers for show. One life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying. One life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying. Mortals of war, took souls of dark forces, leaving corpses. Black mob legends in the jungle, run numbers to thumbs for numbness. Count ones to hundreds, Jolly Greens fell like trees in the 80s. Born and crack baby epidemics of the day. Streets old, gangsters lay on trace. Lost faith of the most high, getting high off the old supply that was fake. They used to be Goldie Superfly, now young bucks is wise. Old eyes is wise. Shootouts and duct tape in Philly cold houses, knocking off stove tops. Bodies drop on stop like beat rock and start rocking. Just for Scotland rock the Tupac. Didn't stop gunshots up and down my block, reminiscing. My mind wants to let go. Listening to Fresco, let's go. Rest in peace, Rob, Chucky Ball, Sexo, Chicano Willie, and Little Sexo. And to my man Stu, who put the blast of tool to his two and banged out his noodles. The bullet exit wounds, we consume ghetto sins from the womb. Mobbing deep and murder music, mortal sleep best cocoons and tunes with new souls of rule. Being slipped to Mickey from Vicky and your cooler. Legends get slaughtered. North Philly bravehearts is up in the water. Tasting flesh from the school kill. Bodies buried on Horny Hill. Single minds pop Sandy pills, feeling chills. Death of their baby fathers on the corner, slipping during the pussy, getting killed. 15 dying and keeping it real, but for real Israel. Death knocks at the door, making martyrs in war. One life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying. One life to live, never slip away. One life to live, never do a bid. One life to live, with banger spraying. One life to live, in the grave laying.
Yeah. On into the dead. Got somebody. War class. Shout out to my queen, my wife, Yay. Shout out to Neo Love, Black Jesus Minister Apostle. You know what I'm saying? Nagas. You know what I'm saying? Peace and blessings to all. You know what I'm saying? That rock with the Lions Den. My name is JJ7000, a.k.a. Mandinka Molly, the most feared debater on this goddamn planet. Y'all hear me? Sit your ass down. I know you can't stand it, man. All you goddamn pseudos. I got them ducking and diving, ducking and diving, slipping and sliding, scrambling and scraping, trying to get away from the goddamn people's chat. That's right. Come on into the den, man. Let me stop sharing this for a second, man. Shit. Come on in here, man. You know how we do it over here today, man. You know how we do. We got Water Blue peeking around on security. You know, make sure ain't nobody coming in here with no nonsense. You hear me? Water Blue, you got your wrench. Anybody coming in with the nonsense, you know what to do. That's right, man. Y'all see the title. And, you know, these guys, they running around here with this goddamn Eurocentric concept, you know, and all this Eurocentricity, you know, and tightening up the Afrocentricism in the community, you know. I don't know where they find these fellas at, man. Hey, Water Blue, you got to be ashamed of yourself bringing these Unc Westerns and Cedrics to the community. Y'all see the title, Darwin's Tree of Life. It's fall apart. Part 2 is Cedric Ortega still running. Your lips gunning, but your feet is running, nigga. You're shooting off at the mouth when I say your lips is gunning. But you're shooting out blanks. Y'all hear me? This guy talking about some goddamn methodological creationism. I said, man, what the hell you got going on with this? It can't explain consciousness, Cedric. It can't explain the paranormal experience, but does that mean that it's not real? Then you have all these ad hoc hypotheses, which is nothing but some made-up stuff that you got going on. That's right. I'm going to teach you today. So we're going to go through a plethora of different flaws in some of your theories, sir. And I'm going to teach you today that it's your best bet not to get in the ring with the people's champ, JJ7000. You hear me? Let's get into some of this meat and potatoes, man. It's going to be a long day for these guys. That's right. Hold up. Let me share my screen. It's going to be a long day for you little rookies. Let me see. Hold up. What we got going on here? I got an itinerary lined up to blow your wig back. You hear me? Hey, it'll blow your wig back. Let me see. Yeah, let's see. Let's where's that video? Okay. Now we gonna save that one for a little bit later. We got mathematical flaws in the theory of evolution. You know, the difficult case of RNA only origins of life, Cedric. I mean, I got a whole itinerary for you. How about the ad hoc hypothesis? Nothing but guesswork. You know, you ain't tell us about that one. 7,000 ran up on it today. Y'all said, "Oh, this is what they're doing." You hear me? I'm here to bring it out. The Lions Den Academy of Education and Information. We bring it out. Don't be yawning. I see you peeking around. Let me put the link in the chat for this damn rookie. You know, hey, you may be the champ, but I'm the people's champ. See, you may be the Lions Den champion. I'm the people's champ. I mean, the people's is bigger than the Lions Den debate league, Lions Den organization. You just the Lions Den champ. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that Lions Den is prestigious. You know, Lions Den champions been running around this community for over 10 years, whooping ass, taking names later. See, the problem with you holding on to the belt, you want to covet it and hold on to it. Don't want to defend it. You've been the Lions Den champion for 9 months. Ain't defended the goddamn belt once. You ain't got the lead. You ain't got the nerve to pork chop lip and run your lip off when I'm doing my information. Yeah. Now you get up here right now, chump. Okay, we'll stay in the audience there, champ. I mean, chump, whatever. Hey, until you get in the ring, defend this goddamn belt, you are no longer you're called the chump. The Lions Den chump. So you get up here, you know. Now the ass woman don't count that I put on you. You know, that was just, you know, getting you ready. You know, I'm talking about you just you're running from goddamn James Cassell. You're running from Silk. You're running from Cosmic Nine. I mean, goddamn. Then I caught you over there yesterday. You over there trying to debate some little rookie debate. I said, look at this dude. You and I supposed to get back in the ring in 2 weeks. Now it was 1 week left. What you doing over there, man? Get up here. I said, get up here right now. Get up here and defend yourself. Yeah, man. He know better. He over there trying to challenge little rookies. You know what I'm saying? Yo, I don't know what's wrong with that. Hey, I don't know what's wrong with this brother. Let me give him a little taste of some medicine over here. Yeah, you better stay in that audience. Y'all hear me, y'all? You better stay in that damn audience. And I said, don't move. You hear? Okay, so can y'all see the screen? We gonna start off with this, man. One of my guys, you know. See, this is Larry Dossey. See, he said, you don't know nothing about Larry Dossey. You see, hold up. Yeah. Okay, hold on. We got Water Blue peeking around, you know, making comments, you know. Yeah, let's say Cedric hiding, y'all. You goddamn right, you better sit down and learn. I'm teaching. All right, hold up, y'all. Let's see what we got. Yeah, he hiding, y'all. As you can see, ladies. Wait a minute. Let me open it up. Let's see. This is from Open, expand the possible sciences. You know, consciousness, Cedric, why materialism fails. See, that's your problem, bro. See, these guys think they can things that only can be tested. That's real and observable and all this old madness, and they disregard, spiritual type of things or things that they just can't understand. And all these scientists have took an oath, they cannot bring any creationism type of theories into their hypotheses, into their conclusions. You see. Now, despite the towering intellectual and technological achievements of the 20th century, science, it spells, over us has been irreversibly weakened. There are at least two important reasons for this. First, scientists and laymen alike have become aware of the limits, Cedric, and shortcomings of scientific knowledge. So that's what you're working with. You're working with limits and shortcomings, Cedric, when you run up on the goddamn people's channel. You hear me, rookie? Now, we realize that our perpetual hunger for spiritual understanding is real and undeniable, Cedric. See, that's why I'm here to teach you. That's why you better say teach. Now, I can either be defined away by suitable logic, nor be satisfied by viewing the universe as sterile, mechanistic, and accidental. See, that's by Roger S. Jones. Physics, that's a metaphor. See? Now, we're going to keep reading now. I'm going to bust down a couple of articles for you, a couple of videos, and then, I'm opening up the panel. Now, the most urgent issue we humans face is how we conceive ourselves. Whether as complex lumps of matter guided by so-called blind, meaningless laws of nature, or as creatures who, although physical, are also imbued with something more. Consciousness, Cedric. So your little science hypothesis and your what they call that? Thesis, it ain't gonna work today. See, we deal with the consciousness, the mind, with purpose, direction, meaning, and spirituality. That's difficult to define quality that says we are connected with something that transcends our individual self and ego, Cedric. See, I'm here to teach it. Now, every decision that we make is influenced by how we answer this great question, who we are. You see, there's a growing awareness that the endless arguments between proponents of these views are more hair-splitting. Let me highlight some of this for this guy. He can't keep up. Oh, wait. Let me see. Oh, whoop. Hold on. But anyway, there's a growing awareness here. I'm right here, y'all. That the endless argument between proponents of these two views are more than hair-splitting disagreements among experts, but they have real consequences for our future on Earth, and perhaps whether we shall have a future. Now, you have consciousness precedes being, and not the other way around. For this reason, the salvation is the human world lies nowhere else than in the human heart. Without a global revelation in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better in the sphere of our being as humans, in the catastrophic toward which this world is heading. Being an ecological, social, demographic, or general breakdown of civilizations will be unavoidable if we are no longer threatened by world war or by the danger of absurd mountings or accumulated nuclear weapons which might blow up the world. This does not mean, Cedric, that we have definitely won. We are still capable of understanding that the only genuine backbone of all our actions, if they are to be moral, is responsibility. Responsibility is something higher than my family, my country, Cedric, my success. Responsibility to the order of being where all our actions are indelibly recorded, and where there are properly judged. See, let's keep it going. I want you to think about what I just read you, sir. Now, the face of physicalism. See, this is what you deal with. Physicalism, Cedric. Physicalism and materialism. Physicalism is a doctrine that the real world consists simply of physical world. You know, they just think that the natural, the phenomena, the supernatural, they just exclude that for some reason, ladies and gentlemen. It's close cousins to materialisms. Physicalism and materialism, which Cedric is running around preaching this Eurocentric madness. You know, this has, African spirituality has nothing to do with none of this nonsense. See, the creed that nothing exists except matter and its movement. But then how do you explain dark matter, sir? You can't see that. Movements and modifications, as well as the doctrine of the consciousness and will, are wholly due to material agencies. These terms are often used interchangeably. Let's see, then right here, you push on number 6, it'll go to your source. See, I got that from the New Oxford Dictionary. Cedric don't show you sources, ladies and gentlemen. He just run his lip. See, that's another thing you're going to have to do. In 2025 going to 2026, you're going to have to do a little bit better than what you're doing. But let's keep it going. You see, that's why he ain't trying to get on stage. Shit, I wouldn't either if I was him. Let me peek to see if he's trying to get up here. I'm just going to let the beat down continue. Yeah, like I said, peace, Blizzak. Yeah, I'm just going to let the beat down continue. All right. He trying to see what he like to do. He want me to show. See, he like me to show a bunch of information because he don't have a case for anything. That's what it is. He never have a case. All right, let's get back to it. Then we're going to get just a couple of videos. Anybody seen Cedric, tell him to get up here right now. If you see him in the audience, I see him in the audience, but it might be a fake Cedric Ortega. You know what I'm saying? I understand them clone pages, brother. Anyway, let me see, where was that? Okay, hold up. Now, where was we at? Now, this physicalism and materialism are cousins, right? Now, what does physicalism actually look like? It is a multifaceted view in which an astrophysical David Lindley has said, we humans are just crumbs of organic matter clinging to the surface of a tiny rock. Cosmically, we are no more significant than the mold on the shower's curtain. See, he basically trying to watch the spirituality, the sense of contentness with something that transcends the individual self, is equated in this view with self-depiction, fantasy, or hallucination. In this outlook, meaning, direction, purpose, and free will are absent. As philosopher Daniel Dennett puts it, when we consider whether free will is an illusion or reality, we are looking into the abyss. What seems to confront us in a plunge of nihilism and despair. Physicalism involved the presumption. See, when you hear the word presumption, you know it's an assumption. You know they're trying to make an ass out of you and me. The presumption that the everyday idea of mind is an exaggerated, unnecessary concept. Do you believe these bozos that, according to linguist Karen Stolznos, thinking is just a meat taking to itself? It's generated by the brain, and when we die, unfortunately, that dies with us. We can state that categorically, or as philosopher Dennett says without a whiff of irony in his book, Consciousness Explained, we're all zombies, nobody is conscious. These some bozos. As the Nobel Prize-winning molecular biologist Frank Crick confidently proclaimed, a person's mental activities are extremely due to the behavior of nerve cells, giant glial cells, and the atoms, ions, and molecules that make up and influence them. I go to all the sources at the bottom at the end, but see, for you newcomers, see when you get the numbers right there, that means you can look up where you got it from. So you just ain't up here, you're backed up by some kind of somebody who did the research, some kind of book that's backing it up, some kind of peer review article, some kind of Chicago, some kind of citation. See, Cedric and them, they don't do that. You never see Uncle West do citations and all these pseudo killers. And don't get me wrong, I'm all right with them, man. But when it comes to this information, they just not that creme de la creme like we is over here at the Lions Den. You hear me? Now, let's keep it going. Now, similarly, astronomer Carl Sagan unequivocally stated, the brain's workings, what we sometimes call mind, are a consequence of its anatomy and physical, and nothing more. They want to limit the brain and consciousness to these scientific experts, these so-called scientific experts. See, all this comes from the age of enlightenment. They're coming up with all these new ideas and theories and thoughts, and we don't need a creator or something greater than us, and they want to just explain it with materialism and physicalism. So, and as I can't pronounce this one, y'all. Physiatrists and sleep research. There we go. Somebody who studies sleep, I guess. As a physiatrist and sleep research, Alan Hobson asserted, consciousness, like sleep, is of the brain, by the brain, and for the brain. In some physicisms constructs, a bleak vision in which a Nobel Prize-winning physics Steve Weinberg said, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. See, these guys are just getting too big for their goddamn britches. You hear me, y'all? These are some of Cedric leaders. Hey, look, a few science insiders are considered religion and spirituality as relatively immune. Let me show y'all where I'm at. Hold up. Right. Hold up. Okay. All right. Right there. A few science insiders are considered religion and spirituality as relatively immune from the corrosive influence of physicalism. For example, an astrophysics Sir Arthur Eddington remarked in his Swarthmore lecture in 1929, dismiss the idea of natural law may swallow up religion. It cannot even tackle the multiplication table single-handed. Others suggest that the intractable mind versus matter debates rest on semantic misunderstandings and is overblown. Among them is the anti-materialist British philosopher Mary Mickley, who said, this is what she said, the real trouble with the mind problem centers on the word materialism. This word itself, a relic of dualism, it suggests that there are two rival stuffs, mind and matter, competing to be seen as basics to the world. It tells us to choose one of these and reduce the other to it. This is what Cedric's doing. They're not two such separate stuff. They're just complex worlds containing complex creatures about whom many sorts of questions arise. Each question must be answered in its own terms. But actually, our thoughts are quite quiet, as real as our coffee cups, and matter is every bit of obscure a concept as mind. It's been difficult to find traction in this debate. The dominant physicalist view that mind and consciousness are products of brain function is served up within contemporary science, not as a modest hypothesis or humble conjecture, but as an incontrovertible fact. And anyone who disagrees is likely to be considered an apostate or a traitor to science. As consciousness researchers Edward F. Kelly of the University of Virginia, of the University of, what was my spot? I lost my spot. Oh, there we go. The University of Virginia states that the landmark book Beyond Physicalism, these well-meaning defenders of enlightenment. See, there you go. See, look. See, I told you, these are Cedric leaders, this age of enlightenment type of characters, y'all. You see, these are the guys that he got posters in his wall with they got the little white wigs on with the little, the little cruffles around the neck and the wrists, with the little Prince boots on. You know what I'm saying? With the what they call them? What the knickerbockers? I'm talking about the little shorts, but they long shorts. That's what they call them. Yeah, dressed up like that. Them is heroes, ladies and gentlemen. Now, these well-meaning defenders of enlightenment, like Cedric's style rationalism, clearly regard themselves and current mainstream science itself as reliable, marshaling the intellectual virtues of reason and objectivity against retreating forces of irrational authority and superstition. For them, the truth of the physical view has been demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt, and to think anything different is necessary to abandon centuries of scientific progress, release the black flood of occultism, and revert to primitive supernaturalistic belief characteristic of bygone times. Now, mathematician and philosopher, let's keep it moving. All right, mathematician and philosopher. Hold up, y'all. Oh, come on, man. All right. Here we go. Mathematician and philosopher Charles Einstein has drawn attention to the condescending mindset that typifies physicalists who hold this view. The unfalsifiable worldview of the physicalist skeptic extends far beyond scientific paradigms to encompass a very clinical view of human nature. The debunker must buy into the world full of frauds, dupes, and the mentally unstable, where most people are less intelligent and less sane than he is, in which apparently honest people indulge in the most outrageous mendicity for no good reason. For the witnesses are, on the face of it, sincere. How can I account for their apparent sincerity? I have to assume either this is apparent sincerity in a cynical cover for most base of fictitious motives. They are ignorant, incapable of distinguishing truths from lies and delusions. And this is really a long article, but let me see how much more. Yeah, man, it's a lot of reading. All right, I'm gonna read a little bit more. We're gonna get into a couple of these videos. All right. All right. A growing number of scientists. Hold up. There we go. All right, that's where I'm at, right? Oh. All right. A growing number of scientists are now busy rummaging around in the brain, trying to explain how the trick of consciousness is done. Researchers of the statue of Francis Crick, Daniel Dennett, Gerald Edelman, and Roger Penrose have recently come forward with a range of ingenious theories. Now look at it. Ingenious theories, okay? All purport to explain in one way or another consciousness as an epiphenomenon of physical and chemical processes taking place in the brain. And all fail utterly. They fail not because their models are insufficiently accurate or detailed, but because they are trying to do what is from the outset impossible. The truth is that no account what goes on at the mechanistic level of the brain can shed any light. Hold up. Okay. Hold up. Come on, man. I'm trying to highlight it. They ain't letting me do it. You know what? Yeah, I'm right here. All right. So the truth is that no account of what goes on at the mechanistic level of the brain can shed any light whatsoever on why consciousness exists. No theory can explain why the brain shouldn't work exactly as it does. Yet, without giving rise to the feeling we all have of what it is like to be, and there is, I believe, a very simple reason for this. The brain does not produce consciousness at all, any more than a television set creates the programs that appear on the screen. On the contrary, the brain filters and restricts consciousness, just as our sense limit the totality of experience to which we might otherwise have access. Nonetheless, the physicalist view inspires messianic confidence in its adherents, who inherently strive to extend the physicalist calipit into every nook and cranny of life sciences. Their zeal can be unbounded. For example, philosopher Dennett is reported as saying that he would commit suicide if paranormal phenomena turned out to be real. There we go. All right. The implication that there might be room in science for a spiritual component is met with diversion. Special contempt is reserved for the possibility that humans might survive bodily death, for this would be the death knell for the mind, equal brain assumption on which the physicalist doctrine rests. This is particularly obvious when physicalists themselves have a near-death experience, suggesting survivals following physical death. When they describe these experiences publicly, they have been bullied by their physicalist colleagues into publicly retracting any implication. I told you they signed this agreement publicly, Cedric. That means these guys have biased conclusions, biases in their hypothesis. Bullied by their physicalist colleagues into publicly retracting any implication that something might survive the death of the body. Many physicalist skeptics consider the idea of survival or bodily death so dangerous that it must be put down at all costs. These efforts can shade into deliberate cover-ups. Cedric, did you hear what I just read? These effects can shade into deliberate cover-ups. So do not be getting up here acting like all their experiment just can be tested over and over again. All this is, come on, bro. These effects can shade into deliberate cover-ups that masquerade as an effect to protect science. Harvard psychologist William James reported. Now we got him snitching from Harvard College. He's a whistleblower. Look at this. Harvard psychologist William James reported that the leading biologist once told him this. Look at this, y'all. Even if here, let me highlight it because Cedric like he can't see. You know. Here you go. You know, this science stuff, man, is all made up. A lot of this stuff is made up. Now, look, even if such things were true, scientists ought to band together to keep it suppressed and concealed. This is coming from Harvard University. It would undo the uniformity of nature and all the sorts of other things without which scientists cannot carry on their pursuits. In defense of their credo, like I told you, they have a credo, a creed that they have to oblige by. Or you would get ridiculed by your peers and your colleagues and even shunned. Let's keep moving. Now, let's keep it going. All right. So, physicalists often maintain that they actually prefer annihilation with physical death to any sort of survival. Longing for immortality is seen to be a defect of character, is what they think. Or a physiological sellout in people too weak will to face their impending doom. In the face of certain extermination, one should simply man up and go quietly, proudly, and bravely into the dark of the night. There is a hint of this heroic martyrdom, like a martyr, in Lord Bertrand Russell's famous comment, "I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego will survive. I shall scorn to shiver with terror at the thought of annihilation." Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. All right. Let's go to human costs. All right. Now, science has gone too far in breaking down man's belief in spiritual greatness and has given him the belief that he is merely as a insignificant animal that has arisen by chance, y'all. And necessity is an insignificant planet lost in the great cosmic immensity. The principal trouble with mankind today is that the intellectual leaders are too arrogant in their self-sufficiency. We must realize the great unknown in the material makeup and operation of our brains, in the relationship of brain to mind, in our creative imagination, and in the uniqueness of our psyche. When we think of these unknowns as well as the unknowns of how we come to be in the first place, we should be much more humble. Sir John Eccles, neuroscientist, a Nobelist. Let's keep going. All right, hold up. Let's keep going. All right, I'm just going right there. All right. Physicalism comes with enormous human costs, which I believe are vastly underestimated by the physicalist cheerleaders. Annihilation is an inescapable part of the physicalist package. Carl G. Jung and Swiss psychiatrist said the decisive question for man is, he is related to something infinite or not. That is the telling question of his life. If consciousness is produced by the brain and vanishes with physical death, as physicalists insist, then any meaningful relationship to something infinite is a chimera. Jung felt so strongly about this issue that he made it a principle in his patient's therapy. As a doctor, he said, "I make every effort to strengthen the belief in immortality." Novelist George Orwell was among those who decried the impact of the morbid outlook, saying the major problem of our time is the decay of belief in personal immortality. Okay. Now, let me get to something else here. Let's go here. Let's go here. All right. The evidence favoring a view of consciousness that transcends physicalism is enormous and is too vast to be described here. Several excellent summaries have recently appeared, such as Varieties of Anomalies, Experience, examining the scientific evidence, Irreducible Mind towards Psychology for the 21st Century, and as mentioned, Beyond Physicalism toward Reconciliation of Science and Spirituality. All told the evidence for more than a century of consciousness research. Hold up. Right there. All right. So, all told, the evidence for more than a century of consciousness research shows that consciousness can do things brains cannot do. Thousands of studies show that humans can physically insert information into the environmental non-locally, and also physically acquire information from the environmental non-locally. What does non-local imply? Non-locality is a concept that physics applied to the class of events whose descriptions relate to the speed of light. As physics Nick Herbert explains, a non-local connection links up to one location with another without crossing space, without decay, and without delay. These connections have three identifying characteristics, says Herbert. They are unmeditated, meaning not connecting signal is involved. Unmitigated, the strength of the correlations do not fade with increasing distance. And immediate, they are instantaneous. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Non-locality is subdivided by many physicists into three types. Type 1 is spatial non-locality. Type 2 is temporal non-locality. And type 3 locality is both spatial and temporal. But physics does not own non-locality, and physics do not have a monopoly on non-local events, non-local events, and the language that describes them. People were routinely having non-local experience millennia before quantum physics was invented in the 20th century, sir. And we are not obligated to cede non-locality to science who have chosen a nuance the term differently. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. All right, we go right there. All right. Now, there are compelling scientific, historic, and experimental reasons for believing that consciousness behaves non-locally in space and time. That it is spatically unconfinable to brain and bodies, and that it is temporally unconfinable to the present. The evidence suggests that space and time are simply not applicable to certain operations of consciousness. This evidence overwhelmingly suggests that consciousness is both transspatial and transtemporal. That is not in space and time. That is not in space and time, Cedric. Empirical evidence shows that brains are separate, but minds are not in the domain of consciousness. Separation is not fundamental. The degree of spatial separation of individual minds, the distance that it is involved, is not important, and the connections are instantaneous or immediate. Whether the humans involved are an inch apart, or presumably whether they are at the opposite ends of the universe. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Many individuals accept the evidence that minds might operate at a distance, but they rebel at the possibility that minds might function outside the present. Yet scores of experiments indicate that human consciousness can operate non-locally, not only in space, but also in time. Temporal non-locality of consciousness has been solidly demonstrated. In these studies, intentions appear to influence certain types of events in the past, even though they presumably already have happened. In addition, individuals often appear capable of acquiring acute information from the future before it has occurred, especially if this information is of an unpleasant or traumatic nature. She said you ain't ready for this type of information, sir. I know. Now look at this. A non-local picture of consciousness has emerged from these studies, in which separation of minds is not fundamental, whether in space or time. A consciousness that is non-local with respect to space is infinite and omnipresent. A consciousness that is non-local with respect to time is eternal and immortal. And if individual consciousness are boundless and boundaryless, at some level they must come together to form a whole, a universal or one mind. When we therefore describe consciousness as eternal, infinite, and one, we are not speaking symbolically or poetically. We are involving empirical science in addition to the human experience. Several top scientists have stipulated that these views are fully compatible with emerging concepts within contemporary physics. For example, George Wald said, you ain't never heard of this guy in your life. A Nobel, let me teach you about him. You hear me? And biology stated, I do not need spiritual enlightenment to know that I am one with the universe. This is just good physics. And the eminent physics O. Costa D. Berengar observed, today physics allows for the existence of what, Cedric? Paranormal phenomenon of telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. Today, physics allow for the existence. Cedric, you in some trouble. Now you're in some trouble, sir. Because all your buddies and your guys over there in your scientific community are switching over. That's right. Now look, today physics allow for the existence of paranormal phenomena of telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. The whole concept of non-locality in contemporary physics requires this possibility. Far from being irrational, the paranormal is postulated by today's physics emphasis in original. Let's keep it going. All right, let's go right there. Now, non-local consciousness is as necessary a concept as non-local subatomic particles, because non-local manifestations occur in the macroscopic human domain, just as remote correlations between particles occur in the invisible, Cedric, subatomic domain. You believe in the invisible subatomic domain, sir? Yes, you do. Moreover, these distinct human-level connections appear to demonstrate the three essential characteristics of non-local subatomic events, Cedric, mentioned above. You can't have it one way, and then if it's the same way as over there, now you don't accept it because you have some kind of agenda. They appear to be unmeditated, unmitigated, and immediate. This does not mean, however, that subatomic non-locality necessarily explains or underlies the non-locality of consciousness. Despite the widespread temptation to assign a quantum explanation for non-local experience of humans, caution is required, Cedric, Unc, Juju, Cube, and the rest of you little, you guys. There's no conclusive evidence that quantum non-locality causes non-local human experiences. Indeed, we may be dealing with only two correspondences in terminology. Now, I'm going to read a little bit more, and we're going to go to something else. All right. I didn't know this article was this long. Okay, well, here we go. I don't remember. Okay, being this long. All right. Many individuals may be surprised to discover the depth of this empirical evidence. There are at least 6 areas in consciousness research that resoundingly demonstrate the non-local, beyond the brain actions of consciousness. Experiments in these areas have been replicated repeatedly in labs around the world. Each are giving odds against chance of around 1 billion to 1, or combined odds against a chance 10 to the 54th power to 1, a truly astronomical number. These areas of research are remote viewing, random number generator influence, Gansfeld, the Global Consciousness Project, presented, and precognition. This evidence is not a cosmic reworking of current materialistic, physicalistic views, but it is a radical departure of paradigm shift in current thinking. Consciousness research, Kelly summarized what is at stake, Cedric. Now, I want you to listen to this, young man. Now, listen good. I'm tired of you running around here acting like you know what you're talking about. Now, this emerging world picture is not just the same old physicalist world, which all altered expressions, but a world whose constitution is fundamentally different in ways that matter to us human beings. This vision provides an antidote to the prevailing postmodern disenchantment of the world of the meaning of human possibilities. The world of the meaning of human possibilities. This is what Cedric and them do. It's not only more accurate and fully describes our human conditions, but engenders hope and encourages human flourishing. It provides reason for us to believe that freedom is real, that our human choices matter. We just not some insignificant piece of sand on the sandbox, and that we have barely scratched the surface of human potentials. It also addresses the urgent need for a greater sense of worldwide community, interdependence, a sustainable ethos by demonstrating that under the surface, we and the world are much more extensively interconnected than previously realized. She said, you don't understand this type of information. See, we strongly suspect that our individual and collective fates in these exceptionally dangerous and difficult times. Indeed, the fate of our precious planet and all of its passengers may ultimately hinge upon the wider recognition and more effective utilization of the higher states of being. She said, you don't have that type of verbiage in your discussions, you know. But anyway, this is potentially available to us, but largely ignored or even actively suppressed by our postmodern civilization, with this strange combination of aggrandizing individualism and fundamentalist tribalisms. All right, let's see how much more I got, man. Let's see how long. Hold up. All right. So, I mean, this is a long article. We'll be another hour reading this, but I want to show some more stuff. Hold up. Let's get into more of the meat and potatoes, you know. That's what we're going to do. Said you still hiding in the audience. Get up here now. We got truth and gospel, truth and believe got the gospel in the building. You know, that's my brother. That's my brother. I think that's my brother right there. Nobody. Yeah, that's nobody. We got Cedric. Look, we got Cedric in here peeking around, hiding. Marquis laughing at you, sir. You know, he don't want none of this smoke. He over there challenging new debaters, rookies, acting like he active in these YouTube streets. You acting like a bully over there trying to fight these new debaters. That's what he doing. You better go get some goddamn practice in. That's what you better do to build your goddamn confidence up. You gonna need it. You hear me, ladies and gentlemen? He gonna need it. This goddamn nonsense he's spewing. Uncle Wes, you done did this guy wrong with all this misinformation you done put in his goddamn pea brain. Damn. Yeah. Get up here and tell us how the eye evolved. I want to hear it right now. You can't. Now, hold on. Let's get back to some more meat and potatoes, y'all. I just did a whole hour worth of reading. Hold up. Let's see. Why is science reconsidered evolution. Let's take a peek at that, y'all. Let's take it.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned oil company focused on unleashing American oil from North Dakota and Montana. We've already sold over 2.9 million barrels.
Causation. Aristotle actually divided.
New evidence has challenged the strictness of the Weissman barrier. But for
all right.
Hello, my name is Adam Ferrari,
Hey, I'll see you.
the Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Energy. I look forward to you joining us at our next investor webinar, where you can drill deeper into our 9 to 13% annual interest rate bond offerings and see how our company has become an emerging leader in the oil and
All right, come on, man. We ain't buying. We
gas
ain't buying
industry.
none of that today.
In 2024, Phoenix Energy rose to become the 11th
All right.
most prolific.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
today. Throughout his career, Noble had deep misgivings about the prevailing theory of evolution.
Hold up, y'all. Let me start.
In 1960, he discovered how heart beats.
This is my guy.
Yeah, Darwinism
Hey,
is
this is
dead.
old school right here. See, old school still got his crippled toes on your neck. Let's get him old school. Don't even worry about your hair right now in this situation. Do what you got to do. Let's go.
The following are conversations with Dennis
Look, he ain't playing with y'all, Cedric.
Noble, a pioneer of systems biology who built one of the first computer programs for modeling human organs. In 1960, he discovered how heartbeats emerge by self-generating electrical feedback loops. His groundbreaking work shaped our understanding of heart function and led to treatments for heart conditions that we use today. Throughout his career, Noble had deep misgivings about the prevailing theory of evolution. His current ideas and research are both angering his peers and inspiring the next generation of origins of life researchers to re-examine how we came into existence in a theory that, as we'll build to in this conversation, takes purpose and creativity as fundamental.
Neo-Darwinism that became the selfish gene, aka the modern synthesis or gene-centered theory of evolution, is that all the same thing?
That's it. That's the best definition. You've just given it. Yes.
I just thought that was evolution.
I see. Okay. Well, Neo-Darwinism is, of course, a theory of evolution, but it's not Darwin's theory, despite the name. That will be a shock to many people. I've studied Darwin very carefully. I've also studied the 19th century people who began to disagree with him. They took Darwin's idea and developed it by making an assumption that they could not prove, which is precisely this. There is a barrier. It's sometimes called the Weissman barrier, and it is absolute. Nothing can go across it.
Hey, everybody, it's Tony Robbins. Listen, no matter how smart you are, even if you're the best neurosurgeon in the world, you don't do neurosurgery on yourself.
The Weissman barrier was foundational in the development of evolutionary biology and modern genetics. In the 1800s, biologist and neo-Darwinist August Weissman hypothesized that there's a strict barrier that separates all the cells in our body that die when we do from the immortal germ cells that produce sperm and eggs, transporting genetic information from one generation to the next in a process that goes back to the beginning of life and can theoretically go on forever. Over the years, new evidence has challenged the strictness of the Weissman barrier. But for Noble, new evidence doesn't just challenge the strictness of the barrier. It undermines the idea that there was ever a barrier at all.
Why was that assumption made?
This is what I'm trying to work out at the moment. I'm actually in the process of reading those 19th century texts. One answer would be that it would be a way of excluding the alternative theory of evolution, which was Lamarck, the French biologist who preceded Darwin by 50 years. Lamarck thought that as the giraffe reaches up to be able to eat the leaves at the top of the tree, it grows its neck, as it were, by sending messages to its eggs or sperm to make the next generation even taller. Now, he may have been wrong about the giraffe. We don't have to take the examples that Lamarck sometimes used as fully illustrating his idea. His idea was the same as Darwin's. Of course, Lamarck did not know about natural selection, but Darwin did. He was the originator of the idea together with Wallace. But in addition to natural selection, he realized there had to be something else. So he was looking for an additional process which could go on in addition to natural selection. And that's why he was keen on the idea of Lamarck, which is that some features of the influence of the environment directly on organisms could be inherited via the germline. That was the key to Darwin's nuancing, if you like, of his theory, and which people like Wallace and Weismann decided they wanted to get rid of.
I'm trying to understand why they wanted to distance themselves from Lamarck.
In Darwin's hands, that idea that the body does communicate with its germline, Darwin was convinced that that was the case. And he's been vindicated recently. In the last 20 years, we have found physiological work has shown that control processes, RNAs that control the genes in our body, do pass from the body to the germline. So first thing to say very clearly is the Weismann barrier doesn't exist. So it was an assumption that it was there, and it was necessarily true that it was there, but it was an attempt to simplify the process of evolution to be only natural selection.
So Occam's razor.
Yes, it's Occam's razor, where you don't need a more complicated hypothesis, make it simple. Now, unfortunately, life doesn't behave like that.
And Occam's razor is just a principle for practicality, right? It's
Indeed, it's a principle which we should respect, but respect with care. Because once you find that there is more than one process going on, you don't go on denying it, just because you want it to be the simplest process possible. If the simplest model I created in 1960 was actually fully correct, we would be dead.
You developed the first mathematical model of cardiac cells in the 1960s?
That's correct. Based on experiments, not just a mathematical theory. It was actually experimentally based, just as the Hodgkin-Huxley nerve impulse was. My examiner was Alan Hodgkin. I remember my supervisor, Otto, telling me, Dennis, you better be right, because, you know, Alan Hodgkin was like a great god to physiologists in those days. You better be right, otherwise we've all got egg on our faces. Alan was fantastic. In those days, you had to queue up to use a huge valve computer, not even with semiconductors. These were valves, like light bulbs, all acting as switches in, and well, I didn't know what it was, an array of maybe 20,000 of these. You then had to queue up to ask for time on this computer, which was itself a marvel. 1960, the very earliest days of valve computers. I didn't even know how to program. I thought I could take my equations to the people who ran this machine and say, can you put these into the computer? Oh, no, Mr. Noble, I was not even Dr. Noble then. You need to buy a computer manual for us. You can go away yourself and learn how to program the computer, which is what I did. I wrote, as far as I know, one of the very first programs for generating a biological function on a computer.
And this influenced our modern understanding of heart functions, which has significantly impacted biomedical research and how modern medicine treats heart disease, which is one of the leading killers.
Yeah, it was the first time that anybody had reproduced the rhythm, the electrical rhythm of the heart, without having an oscillator there to create it. It is sui generis. It generates itself. Once you put the equations in for the different ion channels and how they affect the global cell voltage, which is a global property of the cell, it is automatic, which is why I'm very sympathetic to Stuart Kaufman's idea that life is an auto-catalytic process.
Stuart Kaufman is a complexity scientist, physician, theoretical biologist, an influential figure in origins of life research. In 1971, he theorized about collectively autocatalytic sets, the spontaneous emergence of self-sustaining, self-creating, self-reproducing networks of molecules. His theory was later demonstrated experimentally, challenging gene centrism by validating the possibility that life can emerge, create, and sustain itself without the need for complex genetic information or template-based replication. Kaufman calls this a Kantian whole, after the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant, the idea that the parts exist for and by means of the whole. This is contrasted with our current evolutionary gene-centric theory, where we are created by our genes and our genes are driving evolution. I've been interviewing Kaufman for a story, which is how I was introduced to Noble, as these two scientists independently found similar fundamental patterns of behavior that changed our understanding of how life works.
A year and a half ago, I debated the whole question with the main exponent of neo-Darwinism, Richard Dawkins. Both he and I have been talking with each other. We have a sort of friendship between us for over, well, nearly 60 years, because I examined his thesis in 1966. The selfish gene came out 10 years later. Now, we both respect each other, but he was unable even to understand the molecular, biological, and cellular points and explanations that I was giving. He's a very skilled debater, so he goes off in another direction. Very convincing if you don't realize he hasn't answered the question.
And can we define or nutshell in plain English what genetic reductionism is?
It's exactly what Richard says in his book, The Selfish Gene. Genes created us body and mind. So from knowing the genome, you'd be able to make me. I read very carefully his 40th anniversary edition of The Selfish Gene. First of all, the actual book is republished exactly as it was in 1976. Then he has an afterword, and the afterword is quite long and he's quite careful. And he says, it's a book on genetics, but genetics has transformed out of all proportions in the last 40 years. Why is the book still the same? And then he goes on to an extraordinary phrase. In some ways, I would like to find a way to recant the selfish gene. Darwin, he was looking for an additional process which could go on in addition to natural selection. That was Darwin's nuancing, if you like, of his theory, and which people like Wallace and Weismann decided they wanted to get rid of.
Would another reason for wanting to get rid of that and to lean into genetic reductionism is because science is about reductionism, at least in physics and chemistry.
Yeah.
Scientific reductionism is an approach of trying to understand bigger things by breaking them down into their simpler, fundamental parts. It's used to understand causation, or how small things like particles and chemical reactions can cause or create big things. But reductionism has its limitations when it comes to explaining emergence, where something new suddenly comes into existence in complex systems. This new emergent phenomena can't be fully explained or predicted by looking at the underlying chemistry and physics.
No, the fact is that I think neo-Darwinism is dead.
Because we're not our genes and can't be reduced to our genes?
Precisely. Richard said it in the debate. He said, Dennis, we could carve all the A, C, T's, and G's into a granite block. We'll have the whole complete sequence of Dennis Noble. And we could keep that for 10,000 years. And then we will be able to recreate you. I stopped him and said, Richard, where are you going to get my mother's egg cell as it existed in 1936? So, oh, yes, we would need it. We'll be able to do that by then. Well, just a moment. That was a very... I mean, all of our DNA, all of our cells in our body are highly unique. There will never be an exactly you or an exactly me, nor will a clone be the same, because if you just know the DNA without having the inherited egg cell from a particular person at a particular time, you won't have that individual.
So you can't recreate your mother's egg cell from that time influenced by all of these outside factors that would have changed it in the future. So you can't recreate an individual.
Really create that. We are, all of us, the number of possible combinations of 3 billion base pairs is way, way beyond the total material in the whole universe. So it's just simply impossible. The great majority of the population of the world is a tiny fraction of the total number of possible genomes that could exist with 3 billion base pairs.
Imagine bringing your side project to life just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. Describe what you want and watch it take shape. You can plan, customize, and expand in any.
Noble's work contributed significantly to the discovery of biological robustness, where other genes, biological parts, or mechanisms take over the function of a gene or network of genes. This ability requires an understanding of function at the system level, not the gene level.
As I developed the heart pacemaker model to include more genes and more proteins in the models, it grew into a more complete description of a heart cell. What we found was very interesting. You could remove one of the key elements causing the rhythm, and the rhythm would still carry on. And that can be shown experimentally too. So what's happening is that if the organism finds that this gene is absent, it uses another pathway to do exactly the same thing. In other words, it's robust because it's got more than one mechanism by which it can achieve its need. It's got the ability to be so robust that you can remove a gene that is critical to the normal rhythm of the heart, but the heart rhythm will still continue.
How does that affect the rest of the body and relate to disease?
95% of genes produce only very modest association levels between the presence or absence of that variant of the gene and the disease state. What that means is that most of the time, that kind of robustness that I found in the heart pacemaker occurs elsewhere too. The difference, or rather the exceptions, the outlier 5% or so of us, are those who've got a genuinely monogenetic disease, a disease that arises from a single gene, like the gene misvariant for cystic fibrosis being present, in which case you will necessarily get cystic fibrosis. But those correspond to only about 5% of the total population.
And just to spell this out, if you can remove a gene, that means the gene-centric view cannot be true because there's a prioritization of the organism.
The priority in determining what happens is at the organism level. This is back to the holistic view that I think Stuart Kaufman is also proposing. You have to see a living system as what he calls a Kantian whole. That sounds like a deep philosophical point, but it's actually very simple. The purpose of the individual molecules and genes comes from understanding the whole. Without that, you don't know why those components are there.
And so is this why genetic determinism, you don't think that's possible?
The test has already been done. In the British Medical Journal, Medicine, in October last year, a team from University College London, led by a gentleman called Ingorani, one of the scientists leading this project, they subjected the whole of the polygenic scores, that is, all the scores in the polygenic repository, where you can download all the scores of association between this gene and this function and add them together, which is why it's called polygenic. So they subjected that to the same criteria as a clinical trial of a drug. Is it predictive? Can it tell you which disease you will get? Can it tell you how you would cure it? The answer is no. This is the biggest trial that's been done on the output of the Human Genome Project. It's a failure in cardiovascular disease. It's a failure in cancer. Those account for 60% of the deaths of people. So you don't have to ask me the question, could one show that it's wrong? It's already been shown to be wrong.
I spoke with the lead scientist of this study, a genetic epidemiologist who didn't want to go on camera. But basically, your polygenic risk score...
Hold up, y'all. We put the link in the chat for Yasha. What's up, Jay Snake? Yeah, hold up. We put the link in here. In case anybody want to jump on. All right, let's keep going. Shit. Wait a minute. I hit too many buttons. All right.
adds up your gene variants and gives you a total score for how likely you are to get a common disease. His study shows polygenic risk scores aren't good at predicting who's going to get a common disease because the majority of people who get common diseases don't have a high risk score. So gene variants aren't predictive, yet genes are still causal. And here's why. This is going to be a super simplified explainer, but to try to make it easier to understand, we're going to consider a gene that I'm just going to call Fred. Now, we all have a version of the Fred gene, and all Fred genes make Fred proteins. Some people have a version of Fred that pumps out an excess of Fred proteins, and this allows scientists to see that a lot of Fred proteins leads to elevated LDL cholesterol levels, which is causally linked to heart disease. So scientists make a drug that inhibits anyone's Fred from making Fred proteins. So now anyone with elevated LDL cholesterol can take a Fred inhibitor to block their Fred. Now we all have a Fred gene, and because Fred's proteins can cause elevated LDL cholesterol linked to heart disease, it means the Fred gene is causally linked to heart disease, even if heart disease is multifactorial, meaning thousands of factors are causal contributors to heart disease.
Very obvious that scientists have got to recognize different forms of causation, and you've got to distinguish between them, otherwise there's a terrible muddle. Active differs from passive causation. Aristotle actually divided it up into around 4. I add another 2, because coding is a kind of cause. The cause that arises because of a form, and the DNA as a sequence is a form, is not the same kind of causation as Newtonian things banging into each other. That is active causation. I'm saying that active causation in organisms is the function of proteins, not of genes. That does not mean that genes are not causal.
Because they make the proteins.
Because they make a protein, precisely, yes.
Noble agrees that genes are causal contributors to disease, and genetic research has been instrumental in developing drugs to treat diseases. But even the genetic epidemiologist who ran the polygenic risk score study said that at the moment, there are very few diseases that are possible to cure.
Marcus, thanks for playing. We asked 100 advertisers, what are the top 5 streaming channels to advertise on? If you can guess those top 5, then I'll pay for the next 10 customers who walk in.
Really? All right. First up, let's do Peacock.
Peacock is it.
Okay. HBO Max.
HBO Max is there.
All right. ESPN Plus.
ESPN Plus is on the board.
Woo! Okay. 2
Let
more.
me
Roku.
Roku is in.
For the last one, Pluto.
Marcus, you just guessed all 5 of them. With Vibe.com, you can advertise on 500 plus streaming platforms, including all those ones you just guessed.
Wait, so you're telling me that I can just put my coffee shop on streaming TV, just like that?
Exactly. Fast, affordable, and no middlemen.
What if you can create your own website by saying,
on,
this is what I
man.
want? With Wix, you can. First up, let's talk about AI color themes. You can get any combos you want, bold and bright, minimalist and sleek, or something you didn't even think of. Just describe the vibe you want, or even use the colors of your logo, and let AI do its thing. Beautiful. Next up is the AI section.
Come on.
This is great for those website essentials, like a contact section or a place to subscribe. Now, I'm running a sale, so I punch in some details, and just like that, I have a promo section. Functional and beautiful. I love it. Now, for the AI text creator, I got some products that need description. So I type in some keywords, and there it is. I've got copy that lands. Now, let's see what the AI image creator
We don't care.
Sometimes you just want to spice up your visual game. Type.
But here's the thing. Noble's research has shown adaptive and functionally flexible causation in biology, where various other genes in the network and even non-genetic mechanisms like RNA, hormones, and microorganisms jump in and compensate for a bum gene without missing even a heartbeat. So instead of focusing on genetic reductionism, where we try to break a person apart and sift through the thousands or hundreds of thousands of different genetic and non-genetic factors that might causally contribute to disease, Noble is suggesting we look at the whole person and the variety of ways we may be able to restore function. The biological nature of causation challenges genetic determinism. In the US, Congress had to enact the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, in 2008 to prevent employers and health insurance companies from discriminating against people based on flawed, oversimplified assumptions about the causal relationship between genes, traits, behaviors, and disease, which the polygenic risk score study suggests might be a confusion about causation in biology.
As far as I'm aware, biomedical research relies on reductionism. How do we do science? How do we do important research
If reductionism turns out to be seriously inadequate?
Well, I'm sorry to do an advert, but I've written the explanation for that. Understanding living systems.
Should that be required reading for all medical students? Do you think we need an overhaul of our...
Well, this is what this says. We need to change our biology. Yes, I'm not the only person to say that. I just published in February a review of a book by Philip Ball, a scientific correspondent and one-time editor of Nature. It's published in Nature on the 8th of February. And he simply called Genes Are Not the Blueprint for Life.
Ball concludes that we are at the beginning of a profound rethinking of how life works.
Philip Ball, he's written a much longer book than mine. This is quite short. It's just 150 pages and it's extremely simple. His is a kind of guide for the working biologist to what he calls the new biology. That's the phrase he uses.
If genes are not the blueprint, what is the blueprint?
There isn't one. That's the point. You see, you can only get life from life. Let me qualify that. I'm not opposing the idea, and I know that Stuart Kaufman and others are very keen on exploring it, that somehow it's a natural process for life to emerge on a planet. That seems to me to be perfectly the way to go, and to work out what are the conditions in which autocatalytic sets can start, in which membranes can exist, and once all of that's happened, bang, you're off, and life is developing. Evolution then will take you the rest of the way. I'm not opposed to any of that story at all. What I am saying, though, is this. Once life has taken off, to ask the question, where does the purpose of the living system come from? Where does its agency, its ability to go this way rather than that way, to choose how to find its food, how to mate, and all the rest of it, which incidentally Darwin was also very keen on in thinking about his ideas about what he called sexual selection. It doesn't make sense to say, how on earth does something like purpose arise from simple chemistry? I'm saying that that is a process which you can only take as the whole. It's the whole that gives the purpose to the parts.
how does that derive from evolution? How does that, how does, I mean, this is such a basic question that, I think we just take for granted because we are purposive beings, but how would purpose be a function of an organism?
It's a process that has evolved. It wasn't there before.
So are you in the same camp that functions are this emergent property in biological systems?
Functions are emergent properties, yes. The function to feed, the function to reproduce, the function to perform any of the things that we do which characterize what we call living, all of those are something that has emerged from the chemistry of the world, not there before. Is it correct to regard organisms as purposive? And it seems utterly incredible to anybody to say they're not. Evolution has generated purpose, and that's what the neo-Darwinists do not like at all. To them, it seems to give wind to their creationist opponents, which of course is a form of theism.
Would the concern be, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but if evolution can act on an organism top down and develop purpose, and it's not subject to reductionism, it almost seems like you could take a step back and have a teleological explanation for evolution, like a purposive.
Oh, absolutely. There's a book just published by MIT by about 20 authors called Evolution on Purpose. Now we're coming to the deep rift between Darwin and his neo-Darwinist opponents, Wallace Weismann. They wanted to get rid of the concept of purpose. Darwin was entirely with it because what he saw in organisms like the peacock or in squid or in the octopus, what he saw was clearly purposive behavior. Now, the neo-Darwinists say, well, but that's just quaint 19th century anthropomorphic talking. Of course, he's no longer with us to answer, but I think Darwin's reply would be very much the same as I would give. No, the purpose has evolved. It's as simple as that. You don't have to suppose the purpose was there before the organisms existed. The purpose is itself an evolution.
Noble has proposed a theory of biological relativity, where reductionist scientific approaches, which dominate physics and chemistry and are used to determine causation, are insufficient for understanding living systems, from origins of life research to health, disease, and consciousness. Compounding evidence suggests life does not adhere to any privileged level of causation, nor does it conform to a purely Newtonian notion of causation.
Aristotle said there's also what he called the final cause, which is indeed purpose. What he understood, I think, is that we as organisms can do something now that anticipates the future.
This game, you're not ready for it.
How important is purpose to your theory?
The existence of purposive agency in organisms is, in my view, the central point on which, in the end, the division occurs.
How are you defining purpose?
I think purpose is the use of chance to explore strategies for the future. It is, I've got this array of options in my repertoire because of the stochasticity of my living system. As an organism, I'm using that to try out, in a proper sense, I've got a hypothesis. This could be the future. This could be the way in which I go. Will it work? And the best way to do that is to try it out and see whether it does. So I think purpose can be given a very simple scientific definition. It doesn't have to rely on some kind of spiritualist or religious notion of purpose. I think that's a key, because one of the big reasons why there's such a divide between the evolutionary biologists and the creationists. Once you start to admit that organisms have purpose, the religious side will say, but there you are then, where did that purpose come from? I would say it came from me. It came from me as an organism.
So your view doesn't concern itself with a creator or intelligent designer?
No, not at all. No, absolutely not. That's not to say that those who believe that that is the case are necessarily wrong. I've no idea. But what I can say is that I've no difficulty with attributing purpose to an organism like myself, or to the cat, or to the mouse. And I don't see any reason why, because that sometimes is interpreted in a particular religious context, one has to avoid using the concept of purpose as a scientific concept.
It goes to show that bias that we attribute to religious belief can be just as applicable to skepticism if you're not open-minded about evidence.
Exactly so. Yes, because what's happening, I think, well, I would sometimes say that Richard's position is very much like a religious position. It's got the following characteristics. It's dogmatic. It cannot consider that you might be wrong. Second, it's got the fantastic notion of original sin. We are born selfish. My goodness me, what do you understand what he is saying when he says that?
Hold up, old timer. I got a couple more things I want to show, and it's a long video, so we spent 30 minutes with the old timer. Let's go somewhere else. Hold up. Hold up. All right. Let's go somewhere else. Okay. This one I wanted to show right here. Hold up. Where is it at? Yeah, right here. Oh, this ain't the one. Let's see. Oh, man. For sure. Where is it at? Man, tell me I ain't got the video. Hold up. All right.
The crucial question to decide the debate about biological origins is precisely the question of the origin of information. If you don't have instructions, if you don't have information, you can't build anything in life.
Everyone who works in biology knows that information is needed in order for a living cell to do what it does. On the other hand, there's this huge mystery surrounding information, because we also know as humans that information doesn't come from nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. So you have this big question mark in the origins question in biology. Where did all the information come from?
Until 530 million years ago, the oceans of the early Earth were almost completely void of animal life. Then, within a geologically brief span of perhaps 10 million years, the waters were suddenly alive, teeming with a riot of complex animals, representing most of the major animal body plans that have ever existed on our planet. Known today as the Cambrian explosion, this mysterious episode in life's history was familiar to Charles Darwin, who regarded it as a disturbing challenge to his theory of gradual and unguided evolution by natural selection. During the past century, the mystery of the Cambrian explosion has deepened as scientists have discovered the central role played by biological information in the history of life.
The Cambrian explosion is not just an explosion or the abrupt appearance of many new forms of animal life. It's also an explosion, or would have required a huge infusion or generation of new biological information. Biological form requires biological information.
Scientists' understanding of biological information advanced dramatically when Cambridge University researchers James Watson and Francis Crick made a startling discovery. They found that the structure of the DNA molecule stores information in the form of a 4-character digital code. Strings of precisely sequenced chemicals called nucleotide bases supply the assembly instructions, the information, for building the crucial protein molecules that living cells need to survive. Crick later came to realize that the chemical constituents in DNA function like letters in a written language, or digital symbols in a section of computer code. Just as English letters convey a particular message depending on their arrangement, the sequences of chemical bases along the spine of the DNA molecule convey precise instructions for building proteins. The arrangement of these bases directs the arrangement of the 20 different kinds of amino acids that make up protein molecules. Proteins in turn perform a vast array of critical jobs inside cells, catalyzing reactions, processing genetic information, and forming the structural parts of molecular machines and other biological structures. Building new animals requires many new protein molecules, and building new proteins requires new biological information.
I used to ask my students a question when I was teaching. If you want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? And they would know. They would say code or software or instructions, a program. All those are the correct answer. To generate a new function in a computer, you have to have code. You have to have instructions. The same thing turns out to be true in biology. This is the great discovery of the second half of 20th century biology, that information is running the show in biological systems. To build a new form of animal life requires cell types, requires proteins, and therefore requires genetic information. And that's the big question that the Cambrian explosion presents. If you want to think about how to build an animal, how would these animals get built, you have to have some explanation for the informational requirements of their construction.
According to modern evolutionary theory, new proteins and new forms of animal life arise through random genetic mutations, sifted by natural selection. But in an alphabetic text or a section of computer code, random changes typically degrade meaning or functionality and ultimately generate gibberish.
As we've come to appreciate the digital or typographic character of genetic information, it raises some really interesting questions about the efficacy of that mutation-driven mechanism. And we know from computer code, for example, that if you start making random changes to a section of computer code, you're much more likely to degrade the information that's there already than you are to come up with a new operating system or program.
This problem has long been recognized by computer scientists, mathematicians, and engineers, including a group from MIT who convened a now famous conference at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia in 1966. These scientists met to consider whether the random mutation natural selection mechanism could conceivably generate enough biological information to build a new animal or even a new protein in the time available to the evolutionary process. One of these scientists was MIT engineering professor Murray Eden.
No currently existing formal language can tolerate random changes in the symbol sequences which express its sentences. Meaning is almost invariably destroyed. Murray Eden, MIT.
Eden knew that random changes to alphabetic or digital characters inevitably degrade the information in any section of alphabetic text or digital code, and for a very good reason.
Whether you're talking about digital code in a software program or a section of text in an English sentence or book, or the genetic text in DNA, there are vastly more ways to arrange the relevant characters that convey the information in a way that will produce gibberish than there are that will produce function or meaning.
Eden and his colleagues suspected that the genetic code faced a similar difficulty. When it came to producing new genetic information, at least enough to generate a new protein, the random mutation natural selection mechanism had to deal with what mathematicians call a combinatorial problem. In mathematics, the term combinatorial refers to the number of possible ways that a set of objects can be arranged or combined. In genetics, the combinatorial problem poses a severe challenge to the random mutation natural selection mechanism. To understand why, imagine a thief who would like to steal a beautiful new bike. All that stands between the thief and the bike is a lock with 4 dials, each marked with the numbers 0 to 9. But there is only one correct combination that will set the bike free.
The reason a bike lock works is that there are vastly more ways of arranging those numeric characters that will keep the lock closed than there are that will open the lock.
A thief without knowledge of the combination must guess the right combination from among 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 possibilities. That's 10,000 possible combinations, which usually would be more than enough to defeat a random search for the one right combination. Yet there is still a way the thief might succeed. If he has enough time to try enough combinations, he might eventually identify the right one by chance. For example, if trying each combination takes 10 seconds, then in 15 hours an especially diligent thief could try more than 5,000 combinations, or more than half of the total possible combinations. In that case, he would be more likely to succeed than to fail in opening the lock. But now imagine a much more complicated lock. Instead of 4 dials, this lock has 10 dials. Instead of 10,000 possible combinations, this lock has 10 to the 10th power, or 10 billion possible combinations. With only one combination that will open the lock out of 10 billion, it's much more likely that the thief will fail, even if he devotes his entire life to the task. So what about relying on random mutations to search for a new DNA sequence capable of directing the construction of a new functional protein? Would such a random search for new genetic information be more likely to succeed or fail in the time available to the evolutionary process? In other words, is a random mutational search for a new gene or protein more like the search for the combination on the 4-dial lock or the 10-dial lock? The scientists at the Wistar conference were unable to definitively answer that question because at the time, no one could adequately quantify how hard the search problem was.
So in the late 1960s, one could make these arguments based upon analogy to things we understood, written language, computer code, but we didn't have any experimental data to show whether those analogies actually suited the biological case. So no one could come up with the exact numbers to answer these questions back then.
Molecular biologists at the time did know that the number of possible combinations corresponding to any given sequence of DNA is extremely large and grows exponentially with the length of the molecule in question. For example, corresponding to one short protein 150 amino acids long, There are 10 to the 195th power other amino acid arrangements of that length. That's an unimaginably large number. But scientists in the 1960s didn't know how many of those arrangements were actually functional. They didn't know, in effect, how many combinations would open the lock. That didn't stop evolutionary biologists from speculating. Many argued that there must be a high proportion of functional sequences among all possible sequences, so that a random search for a new functional sequence would have a high probability of success.
The way they did that is to say, well, maybe biological sequences are not nearly as finicky, not nearly as picky about which characters are where as written language is or as computer code is. And so that's the track that they took. That maybe proteins don't really care which amino acid is where, and there's a great deal of variability, and therefore you can have the same function performed by a huge number of protein chains and a huge number of genes.
But recent experiments in molecular biology and protein science have replaced speculation with data. These experiments have established that DNA-based sequences capable of making functional proteins are in fact extremely rare among the vast number of possible sequences. Just how rare? After working at Cambridge University, molecular biologist Douglas Axe set out to answer that question, using a technique called site-directed mutagenesis. His experiments enabled him to estimate that for every DNA sequence that generates a functional protein of just 150 amino acids in length, there are 10 to the 77th amino acid arrangements that will not fold into a stable three-dimensional protein structure capable of performing that biological function. One correct sequence for every 10 to the 77th power incorrect sequences. That's equivalent to searching for just one combination on a lock with 10 digits on each of 77 dials. To put this in perspective, keep in mind that there are only 10 to the 65th atoms in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Could random genetic mutations effectively search a space of possibilities that large in order to find even a single functional protein sequence?
So given that you have this very daunting probability, 1 in 10 to the 77th power, how could something that improbable happen? Well, as we know generally with improbable things, the way that they can happen is by having lots and lots of opportunities for them to happen. So for life, those opportunities take the form of individual living organisms in which a mutation could occur that could conceivably provide the solution. No matter how rare it is, if you get enough of these opportunities, it can become probable. So the question is, if the number is 1 in 10 to the 77th power, if that's the improbability that must be overcome, would the number of organisms that have existed on the planet since the beginning of life come close to matching that number? And it turns out that it doesn't come anywhere close.
During the entire 3.5 billion year history of life on Earth, it is estimated that only 10 to the 40th individual organisms have ever lived. Yet 10 to the 40th power represents only a small fraction of 10 to the 77th power, only 1 10 trillion trillionth to be exact. In other words, for even a single functioning protein fold to arise, the mutation selection mechanism would have time to search just a tiny fraction of the total number of relevant sequences, 1 10 trillion trillionth of the total possibilities. It follows that it is overwhelmingly likely that a random mutational search would have failed to produce even one new functional protein fold in the entire history of life on Earth.
Look at that, Cedric. You're in some trouble.
Of course, the building of new animals would actually
You're in some damn trouble.
require the creation of many new proteins. For this and other reasons, a number of scientists are now questioning the creative power of the random mutation natural selection mechanism. Even evolutionary biologists writing in professional peer-reviewed biology journals are acknowledging difficulties with traditional evolutionary theory. Some are willing to admit we already live in a post-Darwinian era, while others are calling for new theories of evolution. Meyer and Axe are part of a growing minority that has urged the consideration of another possibility. For Maya, the recognition of that other possibility grew out of his work as a PhD student in the philosophy of science at Cambridge University. During his studies, Maya ended up examining the scientific method used by Charles Darwin in his classic work On the Origin of Species. Darwin's method focused on trying to establish the causes of events in the remote past, in history. Darwin's historical scientific method is different from what many people ordinarily think of science.
It's a much more forensic style of reasoning than your ordinary experimental bench science. You're reasoning from the clues that are left behind, from the evidence that we have before us, back to the probable or possible causes that might explain what produced life in the first place, or what produced animal life, or what produced those clues that lie before us. And I ended up doing my dissertation in Cambridge on the historical scientific method. And one of the things I discovered in the process of my research was that there was this distinctive method. It has a name, and that name is the method of multiple competing hypotheses, or the method of inferring to the best explanation.
But how do scientists studying biological history determine which explanation is actually best? Maya found an answer again in the work of Darwin and his contemporary, the great geologist Charles Lyell, who argued that in explaining the past, the present is the key. Lyell insisted that we should seek explanations based on our knowledge of presently acting causes, or causes now in operation. All this led Maya to ask a critical question.
What is the cause now in operation for the production of digital information? Because the crucial question in the origin of animal life and the origin of life itself is, where did the information come from? Information stored digitally in the DNA molecule. Where did that information come from that is necessary to build these new forms of life? And I realized that the answer to that question is intelligence. The cause now in operation, the cause of which we know from our uniform and repeated experience, another key idea from Lyell, that is capable of producing information, is intelligence. Whether we're looking at a hieroglyphic inscription, or a paragraph in a book, or a section of computer code, or even information embedded in a radio signal, whenever we see information, especially when we find information in a digital or typographic form, and we trace it back to its ultimate source, we always come to a mind, not a material process. So the discovery that information is running the show in life, the discovery that there are these huge infusions of information in the history of life, such as the one that occurs in the Cambrian explosion, suggests that a designing intelligence has played a role in the history of life. And it also suggested to me that it was possible to formulate a scientific case for intelligent design, that is, a case for intelligent design based on the same scientific method of reasoning that Charles Darwin had used in The Origin of Species. And so if you want to say intelligent design isn't science, you would have to say that the Darwinian argument in The Origin of Species is also not science, but no one really wants to say that. He's not using an unscientific method, he's just using a different method of scientific reasoning, an historical method of scientific reasoning, and I use that exact same method in formulating the positive case for intelligent design in both Darwin's Doubt and in Signature in the Cell.
To 1 million molecular lesions in our DNA.
Hold up. Looking for this one video that I wanted to show. We'll take a look at this one.
It's been called one of the most powerful and influential scientific theories in history, the theory of evolution by natural selection, first published well more than a century ago by Charles Darwin. And its powerful influence on life in virtually every realm of understanding would indeed be hard to overestimate. But is it true? Many would respond, of course, evolution has been proven true 1,000 times over. All the evidence we have says evolution is a fact of nature. But is the evidence really that solid? No, it is not. And today we'll pull back the curtain on some of the evidence that many evolutionists would prefer you not see. Join us for this episode of Tomorrow's World, where we will expose some of evolution's dirty little secrets. Welcome to Tomorrow's World, where we help you understand your world through the pages of the Bible. And our topic today might seem far removed from those pages: the theory of evolution.
Hold up. Here we go. Look it up.
A series of videos that expose the theory of evolution as a baseless, outdated idea that can't be supported by objective science. Now, the topic for today is the fossil record and how it applies to evolution. Now, the fossil record is often used as if it's evidence for evolution, when in fact, the fossil record has never supported the idea of evolution. The only reason it's used is because all the other arguments for evolution have failed. Now, I'm going to point out 5 serious problems in using the fossil record as evidence for evolution. Interpretation is selective, it's subjective, it's reliant entirely on homology, and this is a failed argument. And generally, the morphologic variability of species, which is profound, this is generally ignored. And there is no accurate method of dating a fossil. Now, for the first point, the interpretation of the fossil record is made by cherry-picking data. And this is because the interpretation of fossils is used not to arrive at the truth, but to justify a worldview. And this is why we refer to the propagation of evolution as a mask of science. This is not science. This is a facade. This is a principle I learned very early in my medical training, that science is based on looking at all the data and then weighing the evidence. You can't just look at anecdotes and justify a pre-drawn conclusion. That's what quacks do. For example, if it's claimed that an herbal medicine can cure cancer, then a study needs to be conducted that documents that all bias has been eliminated. If someone reports only successes, his research will not be considered for publication. When the fossil record is used to justify evolution, invariably selective evidence is given. If someone finds a fossil that appears transitional, he thinks he's validated evolution. And this will readily be accepted for publication in mainstream biology journals. This isn't the way legitimate scientific investigation is conducted. Stephen Jay Gould, who is perhaps the most respected paleontologist of the 20th century, made this statement: stasis, or non-change of most fossil species during their lengthy geologic time spans, was tacitly acknowledged by all paleontologists, but almost never studied explicitly because prevailing theory treated stasis as uninteresting, non-evidence for evolution. The overwhelming prevalence of stasis became an embarrassing feature of the fossil record, best left ignored as a manifestation of nothing, that is, non-evolution. And then later he stated, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. So you see, Gould is admitting that paleontologists routinely cherry-pick data. They are interested in missing links and set out to find them, not to determine whether or not the fossil record really supports evolution. Now, not only is this not legitimate science, this is what we call fraud or quackery in the world of medicine. This approach utterly disqualifies evolution as science from a perspective of paleontology. The selective interpretation of data is a critical flaw in scientific thinking. Like people who peddle snake oil, the fossil record is based on anecdotes. In order to make a correct interpretation of the fossil record, you need to look at the overall pattern. And that pattern is, as Stephen Jay Gould stated, the abrupt appearance of species in the fossil record, followed by stasis and then extinction, with no gradualistic change. Now, you might often hear that the reason for the lack of transitional fossils is because fossils are rare. Fossils are not rare. Over 100 million fossils have been discovered, and 250,000 species are represented, spanning a supposed time period of 500 million years. Now, evolutionists often treat the fossil record as if it's just icing on the cake. And some even go far as to say that even if we couldn't find any transitional fossils, evolution is still secure. Listen to this.
But even if we had 0 hominid fossils, we would know that we're closer related to chimps and gorillas than the rest of the apes. Because every single cell in your body is proof of that, okay? When you take a DNA from your hair or your fingernails or any tissue like you see on CSI where they swab the cheeks, they can immediately sequence your DNA.
Now, this is a common talking point. It's believed that humans and apes are related because of DNA, regardless of what the fossils say. This is a gross error of scientific logic. Evolution predicts millions of intermediate fossils, and if that pattern isn't there, evolution never happened. Science is not based on anecdotes, but on patterns of observation. Now, some people are going to tell you that there are numerous transitional species in the fossil record. And I've even heard the statement that every species is transitional. Don't fall for this. Expected intermediate forms are missing by the millions. For example, if you look at the fossil record of all 4 lineages that supposedly developed powered flight, birds, reptiles, insects, and mammals, no intermediate species that are imperfect in their ability to fly have been identified. In the case of flying reptiles, over 1,000 fossilized specimens have been found, spanning a supposed evolutionary time period of over 130 million years. And they are all equally perfected in their ability to fly. Now, this pattern is real and is not squarely addressed. And the same is true for bats. Thousands of fossilized specimens have been identified on multiple continents, spanning a supposed evolutionary time period of over 50 million years, and they are all equally perfected in their ability to fly. And furthermore, analysis of skulls have convinced most paleontologists that they were equally as capable of echolocation as modern bats. Now, point number 2, the interpretation of fossils is subjective. In other words, conclusions are subject to bias. Take a look at this, the supposed origin of Homo erectus, a pre-human ancestor based on fossils uncovered in Indonesia in 1894 by Eugene Dubois. He went on an expedition with the goal of finding a human missing link. So there was bias from the beginning. And then he found a skull cap which appeared very ape-like. And then he found a human femur 46 feet away the following year. And he also found a tooth. He assumed that these all pertained to the same being. So the femur appeared human, and that indicated an upright posture. And the skull cap indicated lower intelligence. Hence, an ape that walked upright. And from these assumptions, a reconstructed pre-human ancestor was extrapolated. And by the way, he found several fully human skulls nearby, but he didn't report this finding for over 25 years because he knew that this would cast doubt upon what he'd found as a supposed pre-human species. Now, this is not science. This is imaginative storytelling based on wishful thinking. What you have is a pre-drawn conclusion that man evolved from apes, and now you're trying to make data look like it fits your paradigm. Now, the next problem with the fossil record is the unwarranted assumption that homology proves relatedness. Now, homology refers to similarities between species. For example, the overall shape of a human head and a chimpanzee are homologous. The problem with this is that there are many, many examples in nature of homologous features in isolated species that no one believes are related by common descent. An example of this is the eye of a squid and the eye of a human. They're nearly identical, yet this can't be attributed to a common ancestor that had a complex eye. These sophisticated organs supposedly evolved independent from one another. Now, if you examine the seminal evidence of whale evolution, one of the key findings that's always brought up is the homology of middle ear anatomy of modern cetaceans. and how this is similar to the anatomy of a supposed whale ancestor, Pakicetus. Thus, Pakicetus is obviously an ancestor to whale based on middle ear anatomy. Now, this ignores the ubiquitous presence of convergence in nature involving multiple systems. So we found an ancestor to whales, Pakicetus. And what's the primary evidence? The middle ear anatomy, which could easily be explained by convergence. So what I'm saying is, you can't establish a line of descent just by looking at homology. Now, the fourth point, morphologic variability of species.
Paying attention, Cedric?
This is something that's rarely considered in the interpretation of the fossil record. The morphologic variability of species is dramatically demonstrated in the selective breeding of dogs. Every canine species today is descended from the common gray wolf, and all dogs can interbreed with each other and with the gray wolf, so they're all one species. Yet look at the differences in anatomy, particularly skull morphology. Now, all dogs are 99.9% identical in terms of their DNA. So this teaches us an important principle of biology. You cannot look at phenotype and accurately judge the degree of genetic differences or similarities. Here are 4 different dog skulls: Chihuahua, Bulldog, St. Bernard, and Greyhound. This demonstrates the difference that can occur within one species. Now look at these 2 skulls, the fox and the Tasmanian wolf. Very similar in appearance, yet separate species. The Tasmanian wolf is a marsupial. Here's another example, a white bull terrier and a mountain lion skull. These are similar in form, but they are very different species. I also need to point out that the greatest variability within a species includes skull shape and overall stature, such as size and strength of the limbs. Other features, such as the microscopic structure of feathers, or the overall body plan and design, these are fixed traits. Notice that in all supposed pre-human ancestors, the only traits that are considered are those that are known to vary, such as the skull shape. You'll never see variations of foot morphology that demonstrate transition from an ape foot, which has an opposable big toe, to a human foot. So what they do is make false extrapolations. They take traits that are known to vary, such as head shape, and extend these observations to fixed traits that never vary, such as the transition of an ape foot to a human foot. Now, the reason I'm bringing up morphologic variability is because this plasticity of species can account for nearly all of the alleged transitional species that are found. If you examine all proposed candidates for human evolution, essentially all the evidence they give is skull shape, and every candidate can be attributed to either an ape or a human that has undergone inbreeding. So when you factor in the degree of morphologic variability inherent in every species, there is no convincing evidence that there has been any fundamental change in a species over time. Now, a final flaw in the fossil record that I need to point out is the fact that there is no accurate way of dating a fossil. When someone states that a pre-human fossil is 1.5 million years old, understand that this is scientifically baseless. There are no standards used as absolute reference points, and none of the data is reproducible. It's founded on selective interpretation of data. Only dates that fit with evolutionary assumptions are used. This is another manifestation of scientific fraud, and this is a subject that I'll be exploring in a future video. The fallacy of radiometric dating as it applies to the fossil record. If you examine any proposed line of descent based on fossils, it is readily apparent that everything is based on wishful thinking. Now, as I mentioned, the most frequently cited evidence of whale evolution is the middle ear anatomy of the supposed ancestors of modern cetaceans. With that assumption, based on incomplete fossilized skeletons, it's imagined that Ambulocetus had hind legs that were gradually stretched backward with webbed feet. Then Rhodocetus had even more underdeveloped hindquarters, despite no evidence of this in the fossil record. And notice how perfected tail flukes suddenly sprung out of nowhere. These are imaginary reconstructions that are not founded on scientific observation. Over the past several decades, the fossil record has become increasingly used as evidence for evolution. This is being increasingly emphasized because all other evidence for evolution has been decisively refuted. Thank you for your interest in these videos. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, and please feel free to contact me if you have any suggestions.
I got one more video. I got one more video and then we get up out of here. What's the name of it? Where is it at?
And the tree of life are established facts. One recent opinion article argued, quote, the evidence that all life, plants and animals, humans and fruit flies, evolved from a common and natural selection is beyond theory. It is a fact. Anyone who takes the time to read the evidence with an open mind will join scientists and the well-educated, unquote. The take-home message, of course, is that if you doubt Darwin's tree of life, you're ignorant. No one wants to be ridiculed, so it's a lot easier to just buy the rhetoric and join the scientists and the well-educated. But what is the evidence for their claim, and how much of it is based upon assumptions? The truth is that common ancestry is merely an assumption that governs interpretation of the data, not an undeniable conclusion. And whenever data contradicts the expectations of common descent, evolutionists resort to a variety of different ad hoc rationalizations to save common descent from being falsified. Some of these ad hoc rationalizations may appear reasonable: horizontal gene transfer, convergent evolution, differing rates of evolution. Rapid evolution is conveniently said to muddy any phylogenetic signal. Fusion of genomes. But at the end of the day, we must call them what they are: ad hoc rationalizations designed to save a theory that has already been falsified. Because it is taken as an assumption, evolutionists treat common ancestry in an unfalsifiable and unscientific fashion, where any data that contradicts
See that shit? You ain't tell us about this.
the expectations of common descent is simply explained away via one of the aforementioned ad hoc rationalizations. But if we treat common descent as it ought to be treated, as a testable hypothesis, then it contradicts much data. Part 1. The main assumption. As noted, the first assumption that goes into tree building is the basic assumption that similarity between different organisms is the result of inheritance from a common ancestor. That is, except for when it isn't. And then the similarity is purportedly said to be the result of convergent evolution, etc. But even if we take their claim at face value, that similarity between different organisms is the result of inheritance from a common ancestor, let's recognize it for what it is: a mere assumption. But are there other possibilities? Part 2. The molecular evidence. When speaking to the public, evolutionists are infamous for overstating the evidence for universal common ancestry. For example, when speaking before the Texas State Board of Education in January 2009, University of Texas Austin evolutionary biologist David Hillis cited himself as one of the, quote, world's leading experts on the tree of life, unquote, and later told the State Board that there is, quote, overwhelming agreement, correspondence as you go from protein to protein, DNA sequence to DNA sequence, unquote, when reconstructing evolutionary history using biological molecules. But this is not accurate. Indeed, in the technical scientific literature, one finds a vast swath of scientific papers that have found contradictions, inconsistencies, and flat-out failures of the molecular data to provide a clear picture of phylogenetic history and common descent. Indeed, the cover story of the journal New Scientist, published on the very day that Dr. Hillis testified, was titled, quote, Why Darwin Was Wrong About the Tree of Life. Directly contradicting Hillis's gross oversimplification of molecular systematics, the article reported that, quote, the problem was that different genes told contradictory evolutionary stories, unquote. The article observed that with the sequencing of the genes and proteins of various living organisms, the tree of life is falling apart, stating, quote, for a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life, says Eric Baptiste, an evolutionary biologist at the Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris, France. A few years ago, it looked as though the Grail was within reach. But today, the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. Many biologists now argue that the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded. We have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality, says Baptiste. That bombshell even persuaded some that our fundamental view of biology needs to change, unquote. Of course, these scientists are all committed evolutionists, which makes their admissions all the more weighty. To reiterate, the basic problem is that one gene or protein yields one version of the tree of life, while another gene or protein yields an entirely different tree. As the New Scientist article stated, quote, "The problems began in the early 1990s, when it became possible to sequence actual bacterial and archaeal genes rather than just RNA. Everybody expected these DNA sequences to confirm the RNA tree, and sometimes they did, but crucially, sometimes they did not. RNA, for example, might suggest that species A was more closely related to species B than species C, but a tree made from DNA would suggest the reverse," unquote. Likewise, the leading bioinformatics specialist W. Ford Doolittle states, quote, "Molecular phylogenists will have failed to find the true tree not because their methods are inadequate or because they have chosen the wrong genes, but because the history of life cannot be properly represented as a tree," unquote. Hillis and others may claim that this problem is only encountered when one tries to reconstruct evolutionary relationships of microorganisms such as bacteria, which can swap genes through a process called horizontal gene transfer, thereby muddying any phylogenetic signal. But this objection does not hold water because the tree of life is challenged even among higher organisms where such gene swapping is not thought to take place. As the article explains, quote, "Savanin recently compared 2,000 genes that are common to humans, frogs, sea squirts, sea urchins, fruit flies, and nematodes. In theory, he should have been able to use the sea squirt sequences to construct an evolutionary tree, showing the relationships between the 6 animals. He failed. The problem was that different genes told contradictory evolutionary stories. This was especially true of sea squirt genes. Conventionally, sea squirts, also known as tunicates, are lumped together with frogs, humans, and other vertebrates in the phylum Chordata. But the genes were sending mixed signals. Some genes did indeed cluster within the chordates, but others indicated that tunicates should be placed with sea urchins, which aren't chordates. Roughly 50% of its genes have one evolutionary history and 50% another, Savanin says," unquote. Thus, even among higher organisms, quote, "the problem was that different genes told contradictory evolutionary stories," unquote, leading Savanin to say regarding the relationships of these higher groups, quote, "We've just annihilated the tree of life," unquote. This directly contradicts Hillis's claim that there is, quote, "overwhelming agreement correspondence as you go from protein to protein, DNA sequence to DNA sequence," unquote. Other scientists agree with the conclusions of the New Scientist article. Looking higher up the tree, a recent study published in Science tried to construct a phylogeny of animal relationships, but concluded that, quote, "despite the amount of data and breadth of taxa analyzed, relationships among most animal phyla remain unresolved," unquote. Likewise, Carl Woese, a pioneer of evolutionary molecular systematics, observed that these problems extend well beyond the base of the tree of life, stating, quote, "Phylogenetic incongruities can be seen everywhere in the universal tree, from its root to the major branchings within and among the various taxa to the makeup of the primary groupings themselves," unquote. Likewise, National Academy of Sciences member biologist Lynn Margulis has had harsh words for the field of molecular systematics, which Hillis studies. In her article, "The Phylogenetic Tree Topples," she explains that, quote, "many biologists claim they know for sure that random mutation, purposeless chance, is the source of inherited variation that generates new species of life, and that life evolved in a single common trunk, dichotomously branching phylogenetic tree pattern," unquote. But she dissents from that view and attacks the dogmatism of evolutionary systematists, noting, quote, "especially dogmatic are those molecular modelers of the tree of life who, ignorant of alternative topologies such as webs, don't study ancestors," unquote. Striking admissions of troubles in the tree of life also came from a paper in PLOS Biology entitled "Bushes in the Tree of Life." The authors acknowledged that, quote, "a large fraction of single genes produce phylogenies of poor quality," unquote, observing that one study, quote, "omitted 35% of single genes from their data matrix because those genes produce phylogenies at odds with conventional wisdom," unquote. The paper suggests that, quote, "certain critical parts of the tree of life may be difficult to resolve regardless of the quantity of conventional data available," unquote. The paper even contends that, quote, "the recurring discovery of persistently unresolved clades, bushes, should force a reevaluation of several widely held assumptions of molecular systematics," unquote. Unfortunately, one assumption that these evolutionary biologists are not willing to consider changing is the assumption that neo-Darwinism and universal common ancestry are correct. Part 3, Extreme Genetic Convergent Similarity, Common Design or Common Descent. If common descent is leading to so many bad predictions, why not consider the possibility that biological similarity is instead the result of common design? After all, designers regularly reuse parts, programs, or components that work in different designs, such as using wheels on both cars and airplanes or keyboards on both computers and cell phones. One data point that might suggest common design over common descent is the gene PAX6. PAX6 is one of those pesky instances where extreme genetic similarity popped up in a place totally unexpected and unpredicted by evolutionary biology. In short, scientists have discovered that organisms as diverse as jellyfish, arthropods, mollusks, and vertebrates all use PAX6 to control development of their very distinct types of eyes. Because their eyes are so different, it previously hadn't been thought that those organisms even shared a common ancestor with an eye. Evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr explains the havoc wreaked within the standard evolutionary phylogeny when it was discovered that the same gene controlled eye development in many different organisms with very different types of eyes, stating, quote, "It had been shown that by morphological phylogenetic research that photoreceptor organs, eyes, had developed at least 40 times independently during the evolution of animal diversity. A developmental geneticist, however, showed that all animals with eyes have the same regulator gene, PAX6, which organizes the construction of the eye. It was therefore at first concluded that all eyes were derived from a single ancestral eye with the PAX6 gene. But then geneticists found PAX6 in species without eyes and proposed that they must have descended from ancestors with eyes. However, this scenario turned out to be quite improbable, and the wide distribution of PAX6 required a different explanation. It is now believed that PAX6, even before the origin of eyes, had an unknown function in eyeless organisms and was subsequently recruited for its role as an eye organizer," unquote. Typically, extreme genetic similarity is thought to mandate inheritance from a common ancestor because the odds of different species independently arriving at the same genetic solution are exceedingly small. But if we require a Darwinian evolutionary scheme, such an improbable event is exactly what must have occurred. The observed distribution of genes like PAX6 demand extreme convergent evolution and the independent recruitment of this gene at the genetic level. Mayr tries to argue that such improbable examples of extreme genetic convergent evolution are not only acceptable, but common, stating, quote, "that a structure like the eye could originate numerous times independently in very different kinds of organisms is not unique in the living world. After photoreceptors had evolved in animals, bioluminescence originated at least 30 times independently among various kinds of organisms. In most cases, essentially similar biochemical mechanisms were used. Virtually scores of similar cases have been discovered in recent years, and they often make use of hidden potentials of the genotype inherited from early ancestors," unquote. Mayr tries to explain away this extreme genetic convergent similarity by appealing to, quote, "hidden potentials of the genotype," unquote. Does this sound compatible with the kind of blind, unguided, non-goal-directed, and even random processes inherent in neo-Darwinian evolution? No, this sounds like a goal-directed process, intelligent design. Part 4, is homology in crisis? As Mayr suggests, there are other examples where genetic similarity appears in unexpected places. Biologically functional similarity that is thought to be the result of inheritance from a common ancestor is called homology. The concept of homology has been thrown into a crisis via observations like those of Mayr that the same genes control the growth of non-homologous body parts. PAX6 is just one example. Another is the fact that the same gene controls the development of limbs in widely diverse types of organisms that have wholly different kinds of limbs, where their common ancestor is not thought to have a common type of limb. The methodology used to infer homology was also challenged when it was discovered that different developmental pathways control the growth of body parts otherwise thought to be homologous. As the textbook Explore Evolution observes, quote, "In sharks, for example, the gut develops from cells in the roof of the embryonic cavity. In lampreys, the gut develops from cells on the floor of the cavity. And in frogs, the gut develops from cells from both the roof and the floor of the embryonic cavity. This discovery that homologous structures can be produced by different developmental pathways contradicts what we would expect to find if all vertebrates share a common ancestor. ... To summarize, biologists have made two discoveries that challenge the argument from anatomical homology. The first is that the development of homologous structures can be governed by different genes and can follow different developmental pathways. The second discovery, conversely, is that sometimes the same gene plays a role in producing different adult structures. Both of these discoveries seem to contradict the neo-Darwinian expectations," unquote. Perhaps this evidence is just the result of what Mayr called, quote, "hidden potentials of the genotype," unquote. Or perhaps it contradicts neo-Darwinian expectations because neo-Darwinism is wrong. Part 5, molecules contradict morphology. A final way that evolutionists overstate the evidence for common descent is by claiming that molecular phylogenies have confirmed or buttressed phylogenies based upon morphology. For example, in his book Galileo's Finger, Oxford University scientist Peter Atkins discusses evolution and boldly states, quote, "The effect of prediction is that the details of molecular evolution must be consistent with those of macroscopic evolution," further claiming, quote, "That is found to be the case. There is not a single instance of the molecular traces of change being inconsistent with our observations of whole organisms," unquote. Likewise, when testifying before the Texas State Board of Education, David Hillis stated that, quote, "There's overwhelming correspondence between the basic structures we have about the tree of life from anatomical data, from biochemical data, molecular sequence data," unquote. Yet a variety of studies, typically unmentioned when evolutionists promote common descent to the public, have recognized that evolutionary trees based upon morphology, physical characteristics of organisms, or fossils commonly conflict with evolutionary trees based upon DNA or protein sequences, also called molecule-based trees. One authoritative review paper by Darwinian leaders in this field stated, quote, "As morphologists with high hopes of molecular systematics, we end this survey with our hopes dampened. Congruence between molecular phylogenies is as elusive as it is in morphology and as it is between molecules and morphology," unquote. Another set of pro-evolution experts wrote, quote, "That molecular evidence typically squares with morphological patterns is a view held by many biologists, but interestingly, by relatively few systematists. Most of the latter know that the two lines of evidence may often be incongruent," unquote. For example, pro-evolution textbooks often tout the cytochrome C phylogenetic tree as allegedly matching and confirming the traditional phylogeny of many animal groups. This is said to bolster the case for common descent. However, evolutionists cherry-pick this example and rarely talk about the cytochrome B tree, which has striking differences from the classical animal phylogeny. As one article in Trends in Ecology and Evolution stated, quote, "The mitochondrial cytochrome B gene implied an absurd phylogeny of animals, regardless of the method of tree construction. Cats and whales fell within primates, grouping simians, monkeys, and apes, and strepsirrhines, lemurs, bush babies, and lorises, to the exclusion of tarsiers. Cytochrome B is probably the most commonly sequenced gene in vertebrates, making this surprising result even more disconcerting," unquote. The widespread prevalence of disagreement and non-correspondence between molecule-based evolutionary trees and anatomy-based evolutionary trees led to a major article in Nature that reported that, quote, "Disparities between molecular and morphological trees," unquote, "lead to, quote, evolution wars," unquote, because, quote, "evolutionary trees constructed by studying biological molecules often don't resemble those drawn up from morphology," unquote. The article's revelation of the disparities between molecular and morphological phylogeny was striking, stating, quote, "When biologists talk of the evolution wars, they usually mean the ongoing battle for supremacy in American schoolrooms between Darwinists and their creationist opponents. But the phrase could also be applied to a debate that is raging within systematics. On one side stand traditionalists, who have built evolutionary trees from decades of work on species morphological characteristics. On the other lie molecular systematists, who are convinced that comparisons of DNA and other biological molecules are the best way to unravel the secrets of evolutionary history. ... So can the disparities between molecular and morphological trees ever be resolved? Some proponents of the molecular approach claim there is no need. The solution, they say, is to throw out morphology and accept their version of the truth. Our method provides the final conclusion about phylogeny," claims Okada. "Shared ancestry means a genetic relationship," the molecular camp argues, "so it must be better to analyze DNA and the proteins it encodes rather than morphological characters that can end up looking similar as a result of convergent evolution in unrelated groups rather than through common descent." But morphologists respond that convergence can also happen at the molecular level, and know that there is a long history of systematists making large claims based upon one new form of evidence only to be proved wrong at a later date, unquote. Likewise, a review article in the journal Bioessays reported that despite a vast increase in the amount of data since Darwin's time, quote, "Our ability to reconstruct accurately the tree of life may not have improved significantly over the last 100 years, unquote. And that, quote, "Despite increasing methodological sophistication, phylogenies derived from morphology and those inferred from molecules are not always converging on a consensus," unquote. Strikingly, an article in Trends, Ecology and Evolution concluded that, quote, "The wealth of competing morphological as well as molecular proposals of the prevailing phylogenies of the mammalian orders would reduce the mammalian tree to an unresolved bush, the only consistent clade probably being the grouping of elephants and sea cows," unquote. Despite the inaccurate claims of some evolutionists and their cherry-picking of the data, the truth is that there is great incongruence between these two different types of phylogenies, and that this incongruence is a huge issue, problem, and debate within systematics. In conclusion, in my view, the methodology for inferring common descent has broken down. Proponents of neo-Darwinian evolution are forced into reasoning that similarity implies common ancestry, except for when it doesn't. And when it doesn't, they appeal to all sorts of ad hoc rationalizations to save common ancestry. Tellingly, one assumption and view that they are not willing to jettison or consider getting rid of is the overall assumption of common ancestry itself. This shows that evolutionists treat common descent in an unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific and ideological fashion. Meanwhile, as far as the data is concerned, the aforementioned New Scientist article admits that, quote, ever since Darwin, the tree has been the unifying principle for understanding the history of life on Earth, unquote. But because, quote, different genes told contradictory evolutionary stories, unquote, the notion of a tree of life is now quickly becoming a vision of the past. As the article stated, quote, today the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. Many biologists now argue that the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded, unquote. And as scientists quoted in the article stated, quote, we have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality, unquote, or the tree is being annihilated. Perhaps the reason why different genes are telling different evolutionary stories is because the genes have wholly different stories to tell, namely stories that indicate that all organisms are not genetically related. For those open-minded enough to consider it, common design is a viable alternative to common descent.
All right, so we've been on for a couple of hours, man. Just kind of wanted to give y'all this information. Uh-oh. Shit. All right, there you go. All right. See, we're going to get up out of here, man. We've been on for 2 hours and 35 minutes. I think I showed y'all pretty much what I want to show y'all. Let me see if I the videos. Was this? Did we see this one? Hold up. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it for now. I had some articles I wanted to read, but I don't feel like doing all that. Let's see. Yeah. But this is okay. Yeah, we'll get into this next time. And get up out of here. Uh-oh. Hold up, baby, in the show. All right, so we're finna get up out of here.
I roll with these lions, don't tell you no bears. What? That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air. Most like keep a crispy pair. We them debaters, we terminators. Leaving their brains up on the table. We just get back and we fill it up. You are the gas, we be filling up. I roll with these lions, don't tell you no bears. What? That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air. Most like keep a crispy pair. We them debaters, we terminators, leaving their brains up on the table. Bet with these busters, most of you niggas we really don't trust. Coming live on the screen, they lie on the meme, so fuck a lie. Take a walk. That shit might be rude. You ain't even paying your dues. How the fuck you think you prove shit? Just don't make the news. Body left, but ain't no clue. That jet what happened when you snooze. Keep your dap, don't fuck with you. I keep on hearing the boss be wanting that smoke. But every time I see that nigga keep saying he don't know, bitch, it's gonna make you know. JJ set up that little show just so we can see it. Fraud broke, Neo be on gold, that's for sure. Last time I seen the boy, he was copping nooses. Yeah, back up on the scene, but he was not with Rufus. I roll with these lions, no tiger, no bears. That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air. Most like keep a crispy pair. We them debaters, we terminators. Leaving their brains up on the table. We just get back and we fill it up. You are the gas, we be filling up. I roll these lions, no tiger, no bears. What? That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air. Most like keep a crispy pair. We not debaters, we terminators. Keeping their brains up on the table. We just get back and we fill it up. You are the gas, we be filling up. Niggas be geeking, they really want cloud. Some of them hearing my shit, they switching their style, they really too wild. I can spill it, this shit, you niggas right here. You really a bitch. Ryan be up in this bitch, you really a bitch, so you be jumping from click to click, don't make me put a blick. Green dots on the stick, we go hard, you don't want it. On my spar, you don't want it, y'all niggas ain't got no money, I'm sick. WVS, you ain't got no feds, no. Diamond dash, brown and neck, put up in bitch, niggas was fresh. Water dripping off me like a faucet, hoes just lost it. Lions, that's my team, we live too awesome, call it boss. What you mean? I mean everything. You may call it flossing, shout out to Reggie Crib, my nigga. No, in Memphis, say I'm flossing. I roll with these lions, no tiger, no bears. What? That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air, most like keep a crispy pair. We not debaters, we terminators, leaving their brains up on the table. We just get back and we fill it up. Try to get, we be filling up. I roll with these lions, no tiger, no bears. What? That don't make shit fair. All these stacks up in the air, most like keep a crispy pair. We not debaters, we terminators, leaving their brains up on the table. We just get back and we fill it up. You are the gas, we be filling up. Hope you know it's 2023. We got to do it like some motherfucking balls slam. Lions in the building, thought you. Lions in the building,
Yep. We out. Maybe. Yeah. Let me on in the show. There we go. And we out of here. Peace.